back to my channel. My name is Paula. Today I am recording a video and posting it to two of my channels. One it will be posted on is Bull Run Paranormal, and the other will be on The Witch's Cauldron. A very dear friend of mine loved making fairy gardens, and we lost her to cancer right before Christmas. But I had promised her before she died that I would make this video on fairies, because she loved the thought of fairies and the joy that making those fairy gardens brought to her when she was so sick, so that she could, leave a little piece of magic behind when she passed on. So we're going to cover a couple of different things. On the Bull Run channel, the video is going to pertain more to the Fae, the different types of Fae, and how to recognize them as a paranormal investigator, and the potential for protecting someone against different types of the darker Fae, the Unseelie court. And the other video will be posted on my channel called The Witch's Cauldron. And that's going to be more of an approach from performing fairy magic and how to get the good folk to help you. I do not recommend that anyone taunt the Fae or fairies. In general, they can be, they are a very proud being, and for folks to just kind of assume that something doesn't exist because you can't feel it doesn't mean, because you can't see it doesn't mean that they don't exist. If you ask a lot of people will say that they believe in spirits and in ghosts, and a lot of times you can't see them, but yet people believe in them. So, it would be very presumptuous to believe that something like elemental spirits, which I've already done videos on, and the Fae and other types of magical beings don't exist, just because you can't always see them, okay? But they need to be treated with respect, because fairies are very proud, the Fae. They actually prefer to be referred to as the Fae or the good folk. Their origins are very deep in Celtic culture, particularly, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and parts of England. People in the United States and other parts of the world have a little bit different perception of the Fae, and you think of the like Tinkerbell as being a fairy, and that's not what the Fae are. So sit back, enjoy. We're going to talk a little bit of magic. We're going to talk a little bit of protection. We're going to talk about a little bit of mayhem that the Fae can bring into your life. So with that, my friends, here we go. As I mentioned, on this channel, I am going to be going over the Fae, or fair folks, or fairies. Now, there are different types of fairies involved. As with anything, there's light, there's dark, there's good, there's evil. There are the Seelie court and the Unseelie court of the Fae. And a lot of people run into trouble when they don't pay proper respect to the Fae. And a lot of times you can really get into a lot of trouble with a fairy, with either the Seelie or the Unseelie court. The Seelie being the quote light court, and the Unseelie being the dark court. Okay. Um, Now it is genuine. It is generally held that to protect general protection from the Fae, especially the Unseelie court, um, is that they believe people believe that most fairies have an aversion to iron. Okay, so that would be um, putting an iron horseshoe above your door, putting iron nails across your threshold, things of that, and wearing a necklace made out of iron, something like that, because they do have an aversion. Some people hold that the Fae can't cross water. Well, that's kind of a misnomer because there are water fairies. So that would not hold true for that particular type of the Fae. But people don't realize that there are different types of Fae within the fair folk. Okay, and one of one of the most feared is the banshee, and in Gaelic it's Bean dash Sidhe. Sidhe in Gaelic is she. Okay, so that's the banshee. If you're from America, it's Banshee. And in the grand scheme of things, the danger level of a banshee is very low. It's like a category 1 or a category 2 on a scale of 1 to 10. It's a very low threat level. They're not very common. And it's usually within hearing distance of an old Irish family. Okay. And what is typical of the banshee is hearing a wail or very high pitched keening, like screaming. And it's immediately preceding a death in the family. So that is why the banshee is so feared in Irish folklore and everything, because it's a portent of someone in the family passing away. Now, the thing about the banshee is once someone has died, the banshee goes away. So, and some think that a banshee comes from someone who experienced such grave loss from a loved one that their grief turned them into this wild, keening, screaming spirit. Okay, that's where a lot of the mythology leads us. So they always appear as female in form. Okay. Usually they appeared, old and haggard, with, wild hair. A lot of them can appear fully corporeal. In other words, you can downright see them. Okay. Some appear translucent, more like an apparition. But the key is the keening scream, and that is a banshee. Okay. Sometimes a banshee, rather than, the typical keening hag, will appear not as, this wild-haired hag, but as an old woman. Okay. It's also believed that some in Irish folklore that banshee often attach themselves to the old Irish families. And then whenever they hear the banshee cry, they know that someone in the family is dying or going to die. So in the grand scheme of things, the banshee is not a big, like, direct threat. It's more of an omen. The banshee only comes around for a very limited time. And then once someone in the family has passed on, they leave until the next death in the family is to come. Okay. Most people do not realize that there are also what are called brownies and boggarts. And they're actually more dangerous than a banshee is. And, their threat level is around a 3 or a 4. They're not that dangerous. Where you can find them is around ancestral homes, very old homes. For brownies, the typical things that you might see are small household chores mysteriously being finished. The kitchen remains clean. For boggarts, objects are thrown about, including clothes torn without cause, and your gardens withering no matter how much you work in them. Like you work yourself to death trying to keep your garden, pretty and fruitful, and it's like you've got a brown thumb. Well, there you go. So in the lore, brownies are like a household fairy. Think in Harry Potter, the house elves. That's almost what a brownie is like, okay? For those of you that are familiar with the Harry Potter books and such. Now, they originated, the mythology of them, or folklore, I should say, originates in England. But through emigration, the thought of brownies and boggarts have come to, other parts of the world. And brownies are household fairies, and they live in the houses with their people that they kind of attach to, okay? And it's like, the house stays clean, very little, even when you think you've made it a complete mess, somehow it's tidy still. Things of that. And they almost always do their work at night. So, I used to say when I was a little girl, I wish that, the dishwashing fairy would come and take over my task or whatever, because we washed all of our dishes by hand when I was a kid. We didn't have dishwashers. I know, imagine that nowadays. So brownies are very not that threat, and however, they are proud, and they will get very angry if the family that they have attached to says negative things about them, or dismisses them as just being merely fairies. Because they're proud. The Fae are proud. So it is always a good idea to refer to any type of fairy as the good folk, the fair folk, something like that. You've got to have due reverence for them, or things can go really south. If the owner of the house offers to pay them for their work, for brownies, they'll leave the family. Because it's almost like they are offended, or if you leave them gifts of clothing. So then they will leave the house. Um, it is an insult to do so to a brownie because that means that you've seen them as a servant, and they're too proud for that. They are, in fact, blessing you with their work and honoring you, and you should honor them. Okay. Um, and if a brownie is treated badly, it can turn into a boggart. Now, a boggart is very mischievous, and um, they run amok by just destroying your household goods, destroying your gardens, destroying your fields. They just wreak havoc everywhere. Um, where brownies have like normal facial expressions, a boggart is always like scowling and grumpy and grimacing. Um, they're just nasty little boogers. Um, Once a brownie has gone boggart, it will just absolutely destroy your furniture. It'll turn milk sour, rip your clothes up. Um, in other words, they will start basically tearing apart everything that they used to help you with because you have offended them. So, the one thing that you can kind of do to placate and show a brownie that you appreciate them is to leave out cream, milk, especially if it's sweetened with a little bit of honey. Um, and then sometimes that can actually turn a boggart back into a brownie because it shows that you've recognized the error in your way and you're trying to get back in its good graces. Okay. Um, the key to the whole thing is if you've got a brownie, be appreciative and try to keep it from turning into a boggart to start with. If you think you may have a boggart, you need to start apologizing and trying to placate the boggart. And that's the way that you can, you know, really rid yourself of that kind of mischievous type of spirit. All right. Also included in the Fae are goblins, and most people don't realize that. They think like goblins are demonic, but they're not. They're part of the Fae. They're part of the fair folk, and they're part of the Unseelie court. Um, they are usually found in residences, forests, and caves. Um, there is a wide threat level on this one, like from anywhere from a 3 kind of low level to a 7 where it can be pretty serious. Um, and the situation, if you handle it gracefully, they're more agreeable. But if you do the wrong thing, it's not good. So one of the common symptoms is seeing a small dark mass out of the corner of your eye, household objects being mysteriously broken, seeing a small elf-like creature. Let's see, spoiled gardens again, lack of wildlife around, and proliferation of unexplained mischief, especially malignant mischief. They're also known as hobgoblins in some of the folk, and sometimes they're known as bogies. Um, and this is really where the boogeyman comes in, okay? Because goblins are more appropriate with that than a boggart, but they get flipped around here in the U.S. Um, Now, goblins appear as like small dark masses, or they can have a more defined shape, usually about 2 to 3 feet tall, somewhere through there. And they look like in your mind, picture an elf and then make it misshapen. Make that facial feature misshapen and more menacing. Um, they usually have thin gray hair, wrinkled skin, giving them like a permanent, like menacing scowl. Um, and usually they're either like a muddy kind of green or brown hue. So think those like ugly, pretty, you know, dark, dark olive greens to the color of mud. Okay. Now, these are mischievous fairies. So they will annoy the snot out of you if they're on the lower threat level. Um, and sort of like a child having a temper tantrum almost. Okay. But if they are of the more malevolent type, they could trip you, causing bodily harm, make you feel like you're getting pushed down a steps. Um, Maybe causing bruises that you can't explain. Um, Especially, you know, you wake up and you're covered in bruises all over the place. Um, and what is really scary is they like the nasty ones like to push people downstairs and can really cause a lot of, you know, bodily harm. Uh, some folklore say that goblins reserve their most malevolent behavior for evil people. Okay. Um, in general, most goblins are not all that dangerous. You can liken them almost to like, you know, a bully, a schoolyard bully, okay? Um but they enjoy, you know, your typical run of the mill enjoys making a small hurt, a little bruise, something like that. But the really nasty ones are usually reserved for nasty people, and you can have some pretty serious bodily harm. Now, um, it is one of those entities that it is easier for you to placate them and find a way to get along with them than to get rid of them. Chances are that goblin has been wherever you are long before you ever came along. So that's its territory, and you are, in essence, in its space. Okay? So, um, a lot of lore has it that goblins actually like iron, and they like um that can they can actually use and touch iron where the other entities of the fae can't. um you know, the best way to deal with them again is giving them small gifts. Okay, that would be cream, biscuits with honey. They love shiny objects, especially shiny money. Dimes are a wonderful thing to have all over your house. I have dimes thrown all over the place in case the Fae want to come for a visit. They are kept happy. I also keep a couple of dimes by my front porch most of the time to keep them happy. So, with a lot of the Fae, it's not that you're going to get rid of them, it's that you are going to have to learn how to get along with them and to show them the due respect that they demand. Now, there is a type of predatory Fae that is called the Leanan Sidhe. And this is a very malevolent type of Fae folk. And they're usually found near artists and vibrant young people. A lot of people, people with very vibrant personalities, etc. And what happens is, all of a sudden, out of the blue, a beautiful woman will come along and make offers to that young person or to that artist that are just too good to be true. Especially if, the young person is very athletic, very artistic, then the Leanan Sidhe will try to seduce them. Okay. Their behavior is very similar to a demon succubus. Now, one of the ways that you might suspect a beautiful woman is a Leanan Sidhe is if she appears out of nowhere and she appears naked. There aren't a lot of places you can go in polite society, what we call polite society, and have somebody strutting around naked as the day they were born. So that can be a tip-off. It is very, very rare for a Leanan Sidhe to be around. Where you might see a Leanan Sidhe in modern day is like, the hottest nightclub or club in town. And you can't really tell if, they're extremely uninhibited or somebody, or drunk, because, drunk women tend to be a little bit more, free spirited. So the best way to safeguard yourself from Leanan Sidhe is to make them uncomfortable and let them know that you feel like something is off about them. Especially those, if you have any kind of like psychic ability, you will get a feeling or a sense that something is just off about this woman. That you can't quite put your finger on it, but something's just off. Now, what the Leanan Sidhe does is they drain away a man's life force. And sometimes, this is the form of like a muse, a dangerous muse, like for an artist. Now, it can be very dangerous. In other words, the man can become very, very ill because their life force is being drained away. And if they receive any kind of like accolade for their talent, it is likely that the Leanan Sidhe will leave. And then so will that creative drive, that athletic drive, that force that pushed them along through the Leanan Sidhe will leave. And a lot of times the man will die, and either by their own hand or by disease. Um, and then they become bound to the Fae because they got their, their muse was a Leanan Sidhe. Now, the best way, like with most, is to avoid them. Now, sometimes in some of the folklore, if the man refuses the help of the Leanan Sidhe, then he actually gains control over her. So there are only a couple of things to do. Is for the person under the Fae's power to summon enough willpower to break the enchantment, to actually walk away on their own, not having her leave them in a lurch, but to get them out of the affected's head. And it takes a whole lot of willpower. It's not easy. Now, the Leanan Sidhe will also respond to things that are typically known to repel the Fae. So like iron nails, better yet, hanging, the iron horseshoe over the doorways, etc. Carrying iron nails on the person will repel the Leanan Sidhe. So, the next that we have are Merfolk. And the danger level of Merfolk is like mid-range, a 5 or a 6. They're not very common. And you're not going to remove them because their domain is the water. Okay. And you're going to see them in coastal areas, or even more rare would be out at sea. Usually they hang a little bit closer to the coastlines. Now, at risk in particular are sailors and fishermen. And they're the ones that would see something like fish people. And, there's tales of like merfolk, mermaids, sirens in various cultures throughout the world. And, it's kind of been, I want to say, dumbed down a little bit by movies like, Splash. That was back in the 80s or whatever. And it's more, there was a show that I watched on, I can't remember if it was Amazon, Hulu. I think it was on Hulu, and it was called Siren. That is a more appropriate depiction of what merfolk are than, the Little Mermaid in Disney. Merfolk are more vicious than what is depicted in like by Disney. They're especially like sirens will, call to a sailor and cause a shipwreck. Things of that nature. So, about you can also sometimes find merfolk in rivers and lakes that are tributaries out to the sea. Okay. Now the big thing is if a merfolk tries to entice you into the water, you have to resist them. If you go out there, you're going to drown. There's not a whole lot that you can do other than to resist that siren's call, to resist that call, to resist that pull of you to come into the water or to venture out on a boat into the water. So there you go with that. There's not a whole lot that you can do. Another type of the Fae are pixies. And pixies are not very dangerous at all. They're most commonly found in Britain, but they can be found they dwell in residences and gardens, places of work, and wetlands. And the common things that would happen for a pixie is, you tripping on nothing, that kind of stuff. They're just mischievous. And, having hair pulled or your clothing getting caught on something and getting ripped, or getting caught on something and then there's nothing there. It's like it's just hanging out there on its own. Small objects being misplaced, particularly if they are nice and shiny, like jewelry, rings, that kind of stuff. They're not malevolent. You just have to kind of placate them. And the way that you're going to kind of rid yourself of a pixie, one way is to wear your coat inside out. That is a repellent to pixies. Now, if you change your appearance to the pixie, then they kind of lose interest in you. So, wear your clothing inside out around the house for a little while. I know it's not, heck, I've accidentally gone to work and done that, early morning, getting called out in the middle of the night and go and put my damn uniform shirt on inside out. Those were the days. So also carrying an iron object or an iron nail, something like that, in your pocket, in your coat pocket, will also protect you. But the main thing with a pixie is to just get them to lose interest in you. They're not particularly dangerous. They're just annoying and they're mischievous. It's like having a little bratty kid running amok. And now that I said they're like little bratty kids, I'm in trouble. I'll have to leave some sweetened milk out tonight to pay for that. Oh, man. My luck. Anyhow, another type of fae is the Pooka. And their danger level is, mid-range, 4 to a 5. You normally see them in farm country. And it's like a nocturnal disturbance of crops, okay, and your livestock. So it can be very, very destructive kind of stuff, like, letting your animals out of their livestock pens, tramping down your crops, etc., etc. That can happen. And about the only way is to, again, placate them with gifts. They love freshly picked crops, especially corn, especially sweet corn. So leaving them a gift basket out overnight will usually placate them and keep them from, doing, just wreaking havoc and being mischievous on your crops and your livestock. Now, if you don't want to deal with them, again, iron, put iron horseshoes over the entrances to, your barns, on, your fencing, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. Bury iron nails along the edges of your garden so that they can't go into the garden. That sort of thing. But it's easier to just kind of placate them than to really get rid of them. Now, one of the more dangerous and malevolent type of fairy are red caps. They're very rare, but they're very dangerous. And you see them around the borders of the fairy realm, like down in the deepest parts of an abandoned castle, especially in Ireland and Scotland, and or any like seaside fort that's abandoned. That's another one. Or a fort that is abandoned that has seen battle in the past. What they kind of manifest as are small, leather-clad men with red caps, and people receiving very, very grievous injuries at castles and forts. So you really need to kind of protect yourself. If you go to, Ireland, Scotland, and you go and you visit some of the ruins of the castles, the forts, etc., the forts that have been abandoned, anywhere. So, you're going to want to protect yourself, carry some iron with you. They demand politeness and respect. So if you find yourself in like an actual fight, with a red cap, the only thing that's going to work is an iron weapon, and that's it. I do not recommend trying to take on a red cap, because once a human has been mortally wounded, the red cap will dip their cap in the blood of the fallen victim. So when I'm saying grievous injury, I mean a mortal injury to you, okay? So it's best to just kind of not engage, or to protect yourself by carrying iron with you if you go to visit. And again, you can leave little, honeyed biscuits or sweet biscuits, something like that, behind if you go to one of these places. The next is one that folks are probably familiar with, and that's the will of the wisp. And it just shows as like an unexplained ball of light going into the woods. And it's wanting you to follow that light, okay? Now, will-o'-the-wisp are called by a lot of different names in various cultures, and they're most common around like swamps and bogs, but they can also be forests, parks, or if you like have a pretty substantial like estate, even backyard, big gardens for like an estate garden. Now, some people can mistake the will-o'-the-wisp for like a ghostly orb, but they're different because they have a different kind of movement to them. But if you follow the will-o'-the-wisp, you're going to get lost in the woods and you're not going to be able to find your way out. And eventually, they will lead you into dangerous ground, get you caught up in a swamp, get you caught up in, you know, like a sinkhole, something like that. So they can be tricksters. The best thing is, don't follow one. And it's not very smart to try and follow an orb. It's better to just lay back, you know, to just stand back and observe, but don't move toward it. Don't try and follow it. Don't try and find where it's going. And that's the biggest thing. Again, keep some iron in your pocket. Another thing that is effective is what's called a holy stone, and that's a stone that has a natural hole that's been through it. Those, you know, are pretty hard to find, but the most effective, easiest thing to do is to get an iron nail, and that is the biggest thing that you can do as far as the Fae are concerned. So with that, my friends, that is my defense against the dark for the Fae and dealing with some of the Fae from the Unseelie court. If you are interested in fairy magic, I will link The Witch's Cauldron, my other channel, down in the description box, and there will be another video over there on fairy magic and how witches can work with the Fae in the magical realm. Okay? So with that, be well and walk in love and light, my friends. Good night.